Hey, everybody, we got a great one today. You know, for a change, the great Dahlia Lithwick is with us to go through the business before the Supreme Court. Now, if you're listening to this podcast on the day it comes out, it's Mother's Day. And for Mother's Day, we're going up to Portland, Maine to pay tribute to the matriarch of our family, my wife Franny's mom, Fran. Franny's a junior, and Fran has turned 102 this week. Now, some of you have heard Fran's story. Franny was her fourth child. Phyllis, born a little over a year later, was her fifth. 3 months later, Fran's husband died in a one-car crash. Don Bryson fell asleep at the wheel after doing 2 shifts at the paper mill and hit a tree. So Fran became a widow with 5 kids, ages 7, 5, 3, 1, and 3 months. That's Kathy, Carla, Neil, Franny, and Phyllis. Now, as you can imagine, it was tough. Fran was a young mom with 5 kids, so she didn't have a job outside the home. They made it through Social Security survivor benefits. Sometimes they didn't have enough to eat. In the winter, this is Maine, they sometimes ran out of heating oil. When Phyllis was 3, she could go to Catholic nursery school, so Fran got a job at the produce department of the supermarket in the shopping center down the street. So now they had all the fruits and vegetables that they needed. Franny got a job babysitting when she was 10, I think. All the kids worked. When Phyllis went off to first grade, Fran took out a GI loan to go to college. She got 4 loans, graduated, and became a teacher in a Title I elementary school. A Title I school is a school that receives government funding to support its population of students in lower income families. All 4 girls ended up graduating from college on full scholarships. Kathy became a teacher. Carla worked for the phone company. Franny married me and worked in the engineering department of a post-production facility. Neil went in the Coast Guard and retired just last year. And Phyllis became a lab technician. And Fran retired with a teacher's pension and Social Security. Now, they tell you to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. But first, you have to have the boots. And Social Security survivor benefits and scholarships and GI loans and Social Security made it all possible. So Franny and I are headed up to Portland to celebrate Mother's Day and Fran's 102nd birthday. She can still walk. She's quite deaf, and her eyesight ain't so great, but she's all there. So much so that she was just asking me what's going on with the Supreme Court. We've got a great one today. You know, for a change, Dahlia Lithwick is with us to fill in Fran and all of you on the Supreme Court. Well, Dahlia, it's great to have you back. It's been too long.
It's been a while. You've been rocking my world on television, and then I point and I say to my children, "That's my friend. That's my friend."
And they don't believe you.
Laugh and laugh. Well, your hair is styled in such a. I would like to do a podcast about your hair on that show.
You're talking, of course, about The Residence on Netflix.
Mm-hmm.
We wanted to make me look different than I always look, so that's what we did.
Load-bearing hair. It looks very architectural.
It was, yes. I did that on purpose. So. But thank you for noticing. It's been a pretty rugged start to Trump's second term, and a little scary, or a lot scary. And it doesn't seem like Congress has pushed back against Trump. It's really the courts that have been pushing back, right?
100%. And I was just looking at some data that Bloomberg just put out, Al, where they said there are 200 different courts have acted against Trump in
Jesus.
the first 100+ days. I mean, he's losing across the boards. Like, it is not just liberal judges. It is not just like squishy Reagan judges. I mean, it's like Trump judges are voting against him.
It's a large majority of the cases he's losing, right?
Yes. And
Trump.
Yes.
What are the biggest wins you have seen so far?
I mean, it's hard to say what hasn't been a big win. I think he's just been shellacked on birthright citizenship, which I know we're going to talk about in a minute. But, all of the courts have said the idea of redefining birthright citizenship out of the 14th Amendment is preposterous. He's lost on these deportation cases. These guys that they're renditioning to like horrific CCOT prison in El Salvador. He keeps losing and losing and losing
We'll talk
again.
about that too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's go right to the birthright citizenship, because I'm a little confused on this. The case that's going forward doesn't seem to be directly on that question of birthright citizenship. Let me read how the amendment starts.
Yes.
All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. That's the
There you
beginning of
have
the
it.
amendment. And it's pretty
That's it.
clear.
Very clear. And there's some, I mean, you and I have had conversations over the years about some provisions of the Constitution that are ambiguous. This is not that. This is completely unambiguous on the just language itself. And we also know what the drafters were trying to do, right? Which is cure for the sin of Dred Scott, right? Cure for the sin
Right.
of enslaved people who were not citizens. And they wanted to make a really broad statement, and we've got all the like notes from the drafters and the debates. This is not an uncertain question. They wanted to have this sort of broad sweeping inclusive notion of citizenship that was the opposite of the kind of monarchic idea that only certain people are good enough to be citizens. They wanted to do away with that. And so, as you're saying, they explicitly wrote that as clearly as they could into the 14th Amendment. And as I said, this has been court after court after court has affirmed this reading. Trump is literally like throwing spaghetti at a wall and saying, like, but I think they're all wrong.
Okay, what is the spaghetti then? What is the wall? I mean, why would this get them any further along?
They're arguing, this is the most charitable take I can offer. And I'll just note that the person who explained this to me really clearly was Professor Amanda Frost from UVA, who was on my
Right.
podcast last week. She says the most generous construction of the argument they are making is using that language you just read, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof. She says that they're pulling out the language of subject to the jurisdiction thereof. And she's saying that carves out any children who were born here whose parents are not, citizens or permanent residents. And she's saying that the argument for that is that jurisdiction is political jurisdiction. And that means, in their language, again, you have to have complete allegiance to the United States. That's the language they use. You have to have complete allegiance to the United States, which is nowhere in the Constitution. It's nowhere anywhere. But that's what they say it means, that if you have allegiance to some other place, then you are not subject to the jurisdiction thereof, which makes no sense on its face, right? Because, of course, you are subject to the United States, even if you are not a citizen. If you speed, you get a ticket. If you break into the Quickie Mart, you get arrested. Like, we know what subject to the jurisdiction means.
So this is of the parents. They're saying
Yes.
of the parents.
Yes.
Because a baby doesn't really have any loyalty to
allegiance, right?
Or allegiance, I'm sorry. Doesn't have allegiance. When are they arguing this?
That is going to be Thursday of this coming week. And we've got 3 different cases, 3 different judges who all found this. We've got 3 appeals courts that all agreed that this is what Trump is doing is nuts. And so it's going to be a big honking argument with lots of hours of discussion. And as I said, there is this possibility that they never get to this constitutional or statutory question, because they spend the whole time arguing about whether a single judge in a single jurisdiction can stop a law from going into effect nationwide. And it's very possible we just have a highly, highly technical argument about whether judges can do what the judges in this case did without ever getting to this big, big constitutional question.
Okay, so it could be boring listening.
I mean, It's always interesting, if for folks who just wanna pop popcorn and listen, like, listening to the Justice Department trying to get through any of the cases that they are trying to argue with a straight face is truly one of the only pleasures left in my life, so I don't know if it's gonna be boring listening because these guys are they're, like, just like the Harlem Globetrotter, like, crazy ball handling, lying, distorting. I come for the lying and the distorting.
Oh, okay. Well, if you have that sophisticated knowledge, that I can see why. Yeah. One of the things I've been curious about is these law firms that Trump went after, the ones that caved and the ones that haven't caved. And I guess weren't these law firms basically saying the first one agreed was Paul Weiss? Then
Always took the
that's not a
deal.
name. That's two people. Last name Paul, last name Weiss. They took it. They took the deal, and the deal was that they would do pro bono work of what was it, 100 million?
It kept changing. I think with every successive firm that took the deal, the number went up. So I think Paul Weiss took a deal to do 40 million. And then the next one, I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but like the number basically like the fee to do free work for the Trump administration kept getting raised with every successive firm that took the knee. Yeah.
Okay, so are they feeling silly now? Are they feeling stupid because of all the firms that have held out and look like they did the smart thing, or is that not how they see it?
No, I think well, I don't know how they see it. I'm sure they still think that they made a very smart business decision, that they had important clients who didn't want to get crosswise with the administration and that they all get to keep like their yachts and they all get to keep their, summer homes. And so maybe they're happy with the deal. I will say three things have happened since that series of firms took the deal with the White House. One is, as you say, we've had a bunch of firms fight back. So Perkins Coie fought back, Jenner fought back. These are all very, very fancy white shoe firms. Paul Clement, who was, you may remember, the Solicitor General in the Bush administration, the second Bush administration, he's representing one of the firms. And we're seeing not just that the firms are going to court, but winning in court. So Perkins Coie, that same firm, just had a like rock'em sock'em win from District Court Judge Beryl Howell last week in court in DC, where she essentially, in this 102-page smackdown opinion, just lays down in absolutely no question that the administration cannot punish law firms for the lawyers who worked for them and who they worked for. She says this is just a blatant violation of free speech and it's an abuse of the executive. And she even goes further. She kind of snarks that the firms that took the deal, that their clients have real questions about whether they have like the kind of zealous representation you should have. So she's pretty brutal. And now we're going to see that the other firms that are fighting are going to try to say, hey, can you make that apply to us too? So I think winning in court has been huge. I think that the numbers of firms, Al, that are signing on in briefs in support of them is ticking up and up and up. So like in the first weeks when this was happening, when they were going after Skadden and they were going after Paul Weiss.
They threaten stuff.
Yeah,
They threaten like you won't be able to go into the courtroom.
right.
Those kind of things.
And to revoke security clearances. I mean, it was crazy what they were threatening. They would have made it impossible for all these firms have business with the government. They would have made it impossible for them to do their work. And the numbers of other firms who have gone from kind of sitting on the sidelines hoping that they wouldn't get picked off, they've started signing amicus briefs in big numbers in support of the law firms. And then the last thing that's happening is that some of those law firms that took the deal are starting to lose business. They're losing lawyers, they're losing young associates, but they're
Hmm.
losing clients who are like, you know what, I don't really want a chicken shit lawyer. So
Right.
I think this has been a big win kind of all the way around. And if you think about how kind of small c conservative law firms are and how corporate they are and kind of soulless and bottom liney they can be. To have big wins in this realm, I think is a big deal.
And really took who was the first to, was Perkins Coie the first to say no?
Yes, Perkins Coie was the first to say they wouldn't take a deal, and they were the first to win in court last week, and I think we're gonna see, Sussman Godfrey, we're gonna see other big firms, I think, who are all, kind of also sort of finding their backbone and suing. I think we're gonna see more and more, and this is I will say one other thing about this, and you and I have talked about this before. It's actually really interesting to see, like, the generational divide where it's the young associates who are like, I'm not sticking around for this.
Yeah, I saw a young woman who left Skadden, right?
Rachel
Skadden
Cohen.
Arps.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that we're seeing, like, when we worry about the youngs, like, we're seeing a sort of generation of young lawyers who are saying, I didn't go to law school to do pro bono work.
And we'll see where the stars in law school who are graduating, where they go.
Mhm, mhm. Well, that's the other thing we're seeing now, in addition to everything else I just described in terms of, like, headwinds, we're seeing a whole bunch of initiatives from young law students that are saying, "We're not even gonna interview or take jobs at the firms that took the
Hmm.
deal." And so I think, I mean, listen, you started by saying, like, we are in grim times, and I don't wanna over promise anything, but I think that a lot of the stuff that we coded as acquiescence or apathy in the first 100 days, I think is now starting to manifest as like, "Oh, wow, I was completely freaked out. They punched me in the throat, and I'm coming out fighting." And I think in a whole bunch of ways, people weren't agreeing to everything, they just didn't know what to do. And I think that the law firms are a really good example of, like, a trend going right.
One thing where the judges have been great, but the administration has been terrible, is on El Salvador, on Kilmar Abrego Garcia, and the others who went with him, who also didn't get their due process. Right?
Yeah.
I know everyone's focused on him, but it seems like everybody, because the judge said, "Turn your plane around if you're in the air, and don't take off if you're not," and they didn't obey.
Right. And I think that it's really important for the purists and the constitutional wishcasters who want to have like a carbon dating for, like, when did the constitutional crisis start? Like, are we there yet? Are we
Mm-hmm.
there yet? Are we there yet? I think that was the day, right? When Judge Boasberg in DC said, turn those planes around, and the administration didn't. Like, that's sort of textbook constitutional crisis when you're flouting a judicial order. And we're now seeing, as you say, this is happening time and time and time again. We had a decision from the Supreme Court, a unanimous decision saying
Nine
facilitate
zero.
the return. Yep. And still nothing.
Now, Stephen Miller said it was 9-0 the other way.
Yes. Donald Trump says that his lawyer, this is one of the ways that he, like, manages to sort of dodge and weave, is he keeps saying, I'm just doing what my lawyers told me to do. So, like, don't forget, he said on TV, I could pick up the phone and tell President Bukele to return him tomorrow. Like, he said that. And then
Mm-hmm.
he says, "Oh, but my lawyers tell me." And then he tells us all the lies his lawyers ostensibly tell him. And one of them was that he won that case 9-0, that he could use the Alien Enemies Act to deport anyone he wants. So there's this kind of like sucking noise at the middle of this executive, this unitary executive theory that the president has all the power in the world. But, like, he then says, "Oh, I would do it if my attorneys told me to." So who's running the show here? And it's worth just flagging that Judge Boasberg, the same Judge Boasberg who ordered those planes to be turned around in March, had a hearing just last week where he said to Trump's lawyers, like, "I don't understand. You've got, like, Kristi Noem saying we're using all the tools in our toolkit, and one of them is CCOT prison. That means you have, like, constructive custody over the guys there." And the lawyer's like, "Well, that's not exactly what she means. I mean, I don't want to parse her intention." So, like, this is gets back to, like, when I said to you, watching, like, Justice Department lawyers try to sort of evade responsibility and whack-a-mole their way out of these orders. is like both entertaining and terrifying. And this is a subset of cases where we've got a bunch of district court judges who are getting madder and madder and madder at being ignored, cases that go up to the Supreme Court. And Trump's still playing like word games with like, well, I'm not exactly in control of CCOT prison, even though like we pay them, right, to house our detainees.
I keep hearing that they're threatening to hold the administration in contempt. And I'm wondering what is holding that back.
Yeah, this is the shrimp fork to my heart. I mean, this question of what power do the judges really have other than this like ephemeral like claim to the rule of law, right? And people keep saying like, so throw them in jail, like it's enough. Judge Boasberg, Judge Zines, who's overseeing the Kilmar Abrego Garcia case, like, and stop saying there will be consequences, young man, and level some consequences. And it raises really hard questions, Al, about like, really, are they going to put Justice Department lawyers in jail? Are they going to put Stephen Miller in jail?
Well, U.S. Marshals are tied to the court, right? And not to the administration.
The U.S. Marshals at the end of the day answer to Pam Bondi. That's who they work for. So
Really?
query whether sending the marshals after someone is going to work. And I think one of the reasons we're at this, like, what's the physics principle? Like Zeno's paradox, where you take a step closer and a step closer and you never get there. We're
Right.
at this, like, Zeno's paradox of constitutional crisis. Is I'm not sure any judge wants to be the judge who says, all right, dude, now I am fining you and I'm sending you to prison. And the Justice Department lawyer just shrugs and like goes and gets himself like a soft serve. Like, I think that there's real fear that this is going to put judicial authority to the test, and like
And it'll
one of the
fail the test.
and fail the test, because at the end of the day, right? I mean, this is this famous apocryphal quote from Justice Marshall. He didn't actually say it, but at the Trail of Tears case, famously, Justice Jackson said, the court has made its opinion. Now let them enforce it. Right? They don't have an
Right.
army. And so I think like this is where I try to be mindful to say, in the end of the day, I fear that we are the army for the court. Like, we, the people, are going to have to, if they don't abide by a court ruling. And it doesn't have to be a Supreme Court ruling, by the way. They're already in violation of multiple lower court rulings. We have to start to ask ourselves, instead of like harumphing that the judges aren't enforcing it, we have to start to say, like, what does it look like, when we enforce it? And what is, whether that's at the ballot box or whether it's, in protest. But I think that we have to stop imagining that the court has an army, because it doesn't by design, right?
And a lot of these judges were judges appointed by Republicans. Boasberg, I think, wasn't he?
I think Boasberg was elevated by a Republican. The Barnstormer decision that came out last week, at the end of that last week, what came from a Trump appointee in Texas, Fernando Rodriguez.
That was they were doing the same damn thing, right? They're to CCOT, and it was these Venezuelan undocumented immigrants. I mean, don't they deserve due process? Don't they? And they're entitled to that, and they're not having due process is such a violation of that. How do they repeatedly do that?
Well, so a couple of things. One, you're absolutely right. Due process is protected and enshrined in the Constitution. And one of the things that is really like should send a chill up people's spines if they're listening is that now we're hearing Stephen Miller and Trump and JD Vance say, like, oh, we just can't give due process to everybody. So we'll decide who gets due process. And when one of these
Wow,
cases, yeah,
that's worse than anything I've ever heard.
it's scary
I
as
mean,
balls. It's scary as balls. And in one of the cases that went before the DC Circuit, Judge Patricia Millett said, and they ended up siding with these migrants. But she said, then what's to stop you from sending me to CCOT prison? Like,
mhm.
especially, as you said, in the Abrego Garcia case, the administration admitted they made an error. They said it was an administrative error. They still haven't brought him back. So
Well, they
without due
fired that
process,
guy.
they fired the guy who said it.
They fired the guy who said we made a mistake.
Yeah.
Yeah.
there's no system to determine whether they're sending people. We still don't have the names of everybody who was sent in those first tranches. And I want to say one other thing that I think is even scarier than the no due process thing, which is we keep seeing headlines that call these like mass deportations, right? These are deportations. This isn't a deportation. If you come from Venezuela and we deport you, we send you back to Venezuela where you walk the streets, right? In Venezuela, a free man.
Mhm.
We are sending people to a prison, right? A maximum security, horrifying conditions in El Salvador. So these are not deportations, these are renditions, if not kidnappings. And I think we have to use the correct language because Trump keeps talking about it in terms of deporting people.
Ironically, Abrego Garcia was the only one deported because he was from El Salvador, and there was an order not to send him there because he fled El Salvador because he was in danger there.
Right. There was an order from a judge that whatever else you do, don't remove him to El Salvador. So that's where they sent him. And I think the other thing that's really worth unpacking on these cases is that the more we know about these guys, the more it's clear most of them have not committed crimes of any sort. And Trump keeps like waving around this like AI, like, gang signal, like, hand that he says means that, they're in gangs. I mean, literally, there were people who were being renditioned based on tattoos, based on uncorroborated snitches. Like the vast bulk of these people have no criminal findings against them. And now, as we're talking, you and I right now, they're talking about now sending people to Libya, right? To even worse, more horrifying places. And I think the idea that they can do this.
The Libya Chamber of Commerce is going to have an issue with this.
That'll stop them. I just think that like we have to be very mindful of the fact, as Judge Millett said, that the only thing standing between you, Al Franken, being renditioned to a maximum security prison in El Salvador, where we pay for you to be held, and some other guy is that, a habeas corpus proceeding, due process, right? The ability to talk to a lawyer. And that's what they're saying. Oh, shruggy emoji, we can't afford to give these people that. So that's chilling.
Okay, what else is the court going to see soon?
It's hard to know just because there are so many of these cases that are piling up at the court. And, the Trump administration, if you remember this from the first time round, if they lose, they run straight to the Supreme Court. There's no lollygagging around waiting for the intermediate courts. There's no send it back to the trial court and have a trial. This all gets done on what my friend Steve Vladeck calls the shadow docket, right? So it gets done in the dark of night, often in an unsigned opinion, which is what we saw in those rendition cases. We sometimes don't know what the vote count was. Like we don't know who voted for it. And there's no holding. There's no rule of the case. So this is not how we are supposed to be doing law. But if, as we said at the beginning, there are 200 cases that have ruled against Donald Trump, at some point, some court has to be the court of last resort. And Trump really believes, and this is, I think, the other sort of question that I don't have an answer to. He genuinely believes that the Supreme Court is in his pocket. He genuinely believes that he seated 3 justices and he owns the justices. And it's worth saying here, they gave him immunity last year, right? They wouldn't let Colorado take him off the ballot last year. So he's not wrong to think that these guys work for him. And that's the theory we're testing now.
Except there was 1-7-2 decision, and it was none of his appointees voted with him. It was just Alito and Clarence Thomas.
Right. And this is another one of those late night orders. And the court was so insistent.
This is one for Southern Texas?
Yes. And this is the one where folks will remember seeing the news coverage of them busing these guys from one jurisdiction in Texas to another.
From Southern Texas to Northern Texas, because under Northern Texas, they could deport them.
To evade judicial review. And this is a case that comes out at 1 a.m, right, from the Supreme Court. And the really staggering thing about this, and this is just like nerd court baseball, but it's worth flagging, the court always, always, as a matter of courtesy, waits until the dissent is filed, right? They don't issue an opinion until the dissent comes out. That's just seen as like it's the equivalent of, to issue an opinion while the dissent is still pending is like peeing on the carpet at the Supreme Court. It's just not
Okay.
done. And yet, John Roberts pushed out that order before Justice Alito wrote his dissent and Justice Thomas joined him. And that's the way that we know that inside the court all is not right, because the fact that they issued that opinion so that these guys would not be removed from the country.
They didn't honor the tradition.
Correct. And Alito's dissent came out almost a day later, and he was pissed, but he's always pissed, so who cares? But I mean, the fact that they didn't sort of follow the protocol of waiting because they knew this was exigent. They knew these guys were going to get sent away. And to me, if there's a tell anywhere in this story, that's the tell. And as you said, Barrett, Gorsuch, and Kavanaugh join in that opinion. So those are not Trump's justices.
And also the Chief Justice.
Right. One of the things I remember saying this on your show so many times in the last couple of years that I never believed that John Roberts wanted to preside over like the smoldering ash heap of American constitutional democracy. Like I thought there was a line he wouldn't cross. And then he wrote that immunity decision, and I was just like, okay, clearly I'm wrong because
I was going to go to that. Yeah, the immunity decision.
So he is the author of this misfortune in a lot of ways.
And was that a 6-3?
That was, except that Barrett would have done it much narrower. So, like for some purposes, it was 5-4. For some purposes, it was 6-3. She would have massively constrained the immunity that was granted. But I just think as a marker of this is what the majority was willing to give Donald Trump. And by the way, whenever he makes these like monarchic claims of like his infinite boundless executive power, he cites that case. They gave him that power and he keeps citing it back at them. And the last thing on this is that John Roberts gave a speech on Wednesday night in Buffalo, New York, where he said, like, oh, it's really bad when they threaten an independent judiciary, shouldn't be threatening to impeach judges. Super bad. And it's like, dude, you broke it. You bought it. Like, you gave this to us. And now he's all like miffed that Donald Trump is going after judge by judge the folks who are ruling against him and saying they should all be impeached. I don't understand what happens in John Roberts' head, honest to God.
Fetal personhood. You had one of your shows was on this topic. I forgot who the guest was.
Mary Ziggler, the great Mary Ziggler.
I listened to that, and it doesn't sound like that necessarily is going to come up, but maybe it will. She's basically saying that they're going to say, like, this would affect in vitro fertilization, for example, and birth control too.
Right. Fetal personhood is this totally janky, ahistorical, unconstitutional notion that you are a person the minute the egg is
Conception.
fertilized. Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's no reason to believe that that's true. There were like little seedlings of that Justice Alito parked in his Dobbs opinion. And we know that that's where the sort of like anti-abortion movement has been headed for a long time, is that they want to say, like, if you miscarry, we can sort of dig through the records and figure out if you brought that on yourself and criminalize, right? Because you just killed a living person.
That is itself incredibly scary, because my mom had a miscarriage, and between me and my brother, and and people have miscarriages.
I had multiple miscarriages. Yeah.
And how do you prove that it was a miscarriage?
And you may recall a case from last year where the cops went to a woman's house and literally like removed her toilet, like went through the contents of her toilet because the state wanted to go after her for being
Using
the
mifepristone or something like that?
that they thought that whatever she did to induce a miscarriage meant that she should be prosecuted. So it's unbelievably chilling, and it's the logical next step. It never made sense, right, for them to say, "Oh, we love the baby, we love the unborn, but we also love the mother," right? That's what they've been saying since Roe. We don't want to criminalize, the mother. We don't want to go after the mother. We just want to protect the baby and help the mother make better choices. And Dobbs was like the dog that caught the car, right? Because the minute they could go after the mother, we started seeing case after case after case of either people being investigated for what looked like suspicious miscarriages. We saw women who should be released from prison, right? But who are not released from prison because the state has determined they're a danger to their baby, so they stay in jail, right? Like, we are seeing case after case that goes after women. And so I think it's like, now that's the moment we're in. And you're exactly right. I think if fetal personhood happens, it doesn't have to happen through a case at the Supreme Court. They could do it by just any number of measures. They can just sign something into law. And certainly Trump has, you may recall, in his first run for president, he said something about going after doctors and then walked it back. Like,
Hmm.
he's very curious about the idea of going after people. And so I think the idea of fetal personhood, if you have to take it on its own terms, right? Like you say, you have to go after miscarriages, you have to go after some forms of birth control, you have to go after IVF, which we already saw a state Supreme Court do.
Right. That's the Alabama State Supreme Court said that these frozen eggs are human beings.
Are people. And so I think you're exactly right. It's incredibly chilling. And I think, I guess the only other thing I would say about this is, like, it's coming soon to a court near you. And also, all of that outrage and fury and anger after Dobbs, we have to remember why we were angry, because all of that stuff is now coming true. And
Hmm.
we have to sort of be as angry and horrified at the new steps they're taking today as we were then.
I think Trump, though, is against this. I mean, Trump. This is the last thing Trump wants, right? Is conception at conception.
Personhood at conception. I think you're right. I think that he knows that there would be just like seismic blowback for this. But I also think that there is, a quote unquote pro life movement that thinks that the, wind is at their back now. And this is the next thing that they want. And they feel that, they put him in office and they seated the court. And this is the thing that they want. And if a whole bunch of women have to go to jail, so be it. And one other wrinkle here that's really interesting: the court, had two abortion cases last term. One was mifepristone, and the court was just like, "Whoops, we don't know what happened there," right?
So mifepristone right now can be mailed to any state.
Nope. There's lots of states that have laws on the books, but we
Oh,
don't,
okay.
know what that means. But this is where that Comstock Act, which is this crazy Victorian anti-vice act that has been like defunct. It's considered like a punchline, but this was this like creepy Victorian law that said you couldn't put anything right in the mails. And one of the things that we are already again seeing happen, including in the lower courts, is that judges are starting to say, including in that lower court mifepristone decision, "Oh, that's good law still, and anybody who puts a pill in the mail can be subject to prosecution." And right now we have an abortion provider in New York, right? They're trying to hail her into court in other states. So I think we're going to see the sort of like breathing new life into Comstock, and this idea that, and by the way, this was Brett Kavanaugh promised us in Dobbs, like, in no way are we going to keep people from crossing state lines. That would be crazy. We're going to start to see, I think, efforts to sort of criminalize nationally, to go after physicians nationally. We've got these crazy, crazy EMTALA cases where doctors are saying, like, I don't want to do these procedures, and the state's saying the doctors shouldn't have to do emergency miscarriage care. So I think we're going to see, I think, however it comes at us, it's not going to be another one of those like binary black white, today all miscarriages are illegal. It's just going to be some version of this campaign to like chill and terrify women and to go after people who are providing them with pills. And at the same time, I always say it's really important to say like abortion is, legal, and pills are, incredibly efficacious, and we should not terrify listeners, but we should understand what the long-term game is.
And the colleges and universities, Harvard being the first one to stand up. Where does that go? Is that something goes to court?
Yeah, it's already I think there's no question.
I mean, Harvard has assembled a team of conservative lawyers, right?
In a sense, Al, it's the perfect bookend to the law firms because it's the same kinds of things, right? It's basic free speech. It's basically like chilling conduct that is protected. And it's very much like the law firms in that, like, if you think about the fact that, like, Columbia kind of caved, right? There were other schools that kind of caved. And then as soon as Harvard stood up and was like, no, it turned out that everybody kind of rose up in support of Harvard. So I think, yes, it's going to go to court. Yes, I think there's no chance that Trump can prevail on this stuff, including like all these defunding initiatives. But I think that it goes to your like bigger point that you started with, which is this idea that like, I think the first impulse is to do the kind of like small scared thing, right? We'll take the deal. We have bigger things to think about. We have to think about our bottom line. This is a business decision. And then someone comes along and does the courageous thing. And the first thing, what did the Trump administration say? The first thing, they were like, oh, that letter wasn't supposed to go out. The
Right.
threatening her. Oopsie. So they're cowards.
No,
and
oopsie's Bukele's.
Yes, oopsie was Bukele. But I think that they will never, ever, like, they're such classic bullies that when you push back a little, they're like, oh, we didn't really mean that. So I think it's just really, really such a sort of both Harvard and I think Perkins Coie are just a lesson in like, don't take the deal. The deal sucks. And right, we know this about the law firms. He's going to come back in 2 weeks and ask you to like, represent crooked cop. Like, you're not going to win this.
The coal industry or something.
Yeah, you're not going to win this. You're going to end up doing work that eats your soul. And so I think that here's what I do think I've learned in the last week is that these are all like collective action problems, right? And when you think like, I'm the only law firm in America, or I'm the only Ivy League law school, being threatened in America, or I'm, the only network, CBS, getting sued in America, then I think it's easy to say, maybe I take the deal. And then you see that if you don't, like, others will hopefully join and support. But I think it's just like that classic, we are not good at thinking in terms of collective action because we're so stankin' competitive in this country. And so I think what I want to just always say is like, don't think about this as like Harvard stands alone or, Sussman Godfrey stands alone. I think it's that we have to start to organize like as though this is a team sport and not a solo sport. And I think every time we have done that, we have seen like really important pushback. Every time we have seen somebody stand up and say, you know what? No, we've seen pushback. And at the same time, like Jeff Bezos takes the deal and then he gets pantsed again. Like you cannot mollify a narcissist.
That's a good thing to end on, I think. You can't mollify a narcissist.
Can that be next year's mug? I want that mug.
Well, I hope you enjoyed listening. That beautiful music is by Leo Kottke, the great Leo Kottke. I want to thank Peter Ogburn for producing this podcast. We'll talk again next week.